The wagon creaked to a halt just before dusk, its wheels sinking slightly into the soft, rain-darkened earth. Cora Bell stepped down without aid, her boots sinking into the mud, her black skirts heavy with the wet. She held no parasol. Only a worn leather satchel and a silence that had grown louder with every mile westward. Elias Corbin stood beneath the overhang of the barn, his arms crossed, hat low against the wind. He did not smile. He gave her a nod, a look up and down, then stepped forward, offered a calloused hand. "Cora," she said, her voice flat, almost lost beneath the sound of a distant thunder roll. "Elias," he replied. That was the greeting. He led her up the muddy path toward the cabin, a structure more functional than warm. It stood with its back to a ridge of pines, slate roof patched with tin, windows like half-lidded eyes watching the wind. He opened the door and stepped aside. Inside, it smelled of cedar smoke and damp wool. A fire cracked half-heartedly in the hearth, one table, two chairs. A cast-iron kettle hissed gently atop the stove. A single braid of dried herbs hung from a ceiling beam, its color long since gone. "This'll be yours," he said, gesturing to the smaller room off the main. "I sleep in the loft." She nodded and stepped in. The room held a narrow bed, a chipped basin, and a single rocking chair. No mirror. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened her chest. Inside, a carefully folded wedding dress of pale linen, yellowed with time. She pressed her fingers to the fabric, then set it aside. She pulled a comb from the satchel, unwound her rain-damp hair, and began twisting it into long braids. Her mother once told her, "Braids hold sorrow until it's ready to be let go," from the other room. She heard Elias tending the fire, the sound of cut wood shifting, a match flaring to life. He didn't ask if she was hungry. She didn't ask for food. The night fell early dot when she emerged later, her hair still wet at the ends. Elias was sitting at the table, eating from a tin plate, beans and hard bread. He did not offer her a seat, but she fetched her own plate from the shelf and served herself without asking. They ate in silence, the fire throwing flickering shadows on the far wall like ghosts trying to speak. Afterward, she took a clean cup and poured coffee from the kettle. Her hands trembled slightly. Elias noticed, but said nothing. Just watched her as he sipped his own. Outside, the wind picked up again. Coyotes howled from the distant ridge, their calls rising like old songs. The cabin creaked as it settled into the cold. When she returned to her room, she stared for a long time at the empty chair, then sat in it anyway. Rocked once, twice. This was not a home, not yet. It was shelter, it was what was promised. But as she wrapped herself in a gray shawl and laid down fully clothed, she knew the truth. She had not come west to be loved. She had come not to be alone. Now she was both. Cora rose with the sun, the prairie still silvered in frost. She swept the porch each morning, not because it needed it, but because the rhythm steadied her. Dust, straw, wind-borne needles from the pines, it all gathered like memories. She pushed them away one stroke at a time. Inside, the cabin spoke in creaks and quiet. Beneath the stairs, she found a folded shawl, soft from age, its once vibrant pattern faded to earth tones. It smelled of cedar and smoke, as if someone had worn it for many years and left it folded with care. She didn't ask Elias about it. The days blurred into one another, gray skies, gray thoughts, gray silence between them. Elias left early, returned late. Sometimes with fresh meat slung over his shoulder, sometimes with nothing at all but the mud on his boots. The rifle never left its place near the door. One morning, while gathering eggs from the stubborn hens Elias kept in a crooked coop, Cora heard a quiet rustle in the grass. She turned to find a boy maybe 11, barefoot, eyes like river stone. He held out a small wooden snare. "Trade," he said. "Rabbit for bread?" Cora blinked, uncertain. The boy's hair was long, black and braided, with red thread woven through. He wore a deerskin vest, patched at the shoulders, and had a scar on his arm that looked old but deep. "I don't have bread," she said softly. The boy shrugged and dropped the snare at her feet anyway. "Then keep it." He turned and ran, later. Elias saw her holding the snare, her thumb tracing the carving in the wood-a-bear's paw. Simple, but careful. "Don't take things from that boy. he muttered, not looking at her. Why not? His mother's Nokoma. The name sat heavy between them. Elias took a long breath through his nose and stared into the fire, jaw tight. She nursed my brother when he was shot. After the raid, before he died? Cora didn't ask what kind of raid or whose fault it was. She didn't ask if his brother had died in that cabin under that same roof. Some things didn't need to be spoken to be known. The shadows in Elias's eyes deepened when he mentioned her. She was good to him. Cora offered. She's Cheyenne, he said, as if it explained everything and nothing. That night, after Elias went to bed, Cora cut 2 slices of dried venison and wrapped them in cloth. She left them outside on the stoop. In the morning they were gone, and in their place lay a smooth white stone. Days passed. She began to find small things left for her. A feather wrapped in bark, a pouch of juniper berries. Once, a song etched carefully into birch bark in a language she did not know, Elias noticed, but said nothing. In the evenings they sat in silence. The fire danced. The wind moved through the trees like breath through lungs, steady and ancient. The past lingered in the walls. Sometimes Cora thought she heard footsteps in the loft above when Elias was outside, but it was only the creaking of beams. Or maybe not. She began to understand the quiet that hung over Elias wasn't anger. It was morning. A man surrounded by memories but unable to speak their names. When she set the table, she placed 3 cups instead of 2. One remained empty. One was for Elias, one was for her, and the third for whatever lingered. Grief, maybe. Or a boy named Toma, who still hadn't smiled but always returned. The sky turned black before evening. Storm clouds gathered like a siege on the far ridge, their bellies swollen and dark as coal. Wind howled low through the valley, rattling loose shingles and tugging at the corners of the world like a woman, clawing at a closed door. Elias returned just before the first thunderclap, slumped in his saddle, one hand pressed to his side. Blood stained his shirt near the ribs, dark, seeping, fresh. His face was pale, jaw locked tight. He dismounted without a word and stumbled toward the porch, where Cora had just stepped outside, kerchief to her nose against the rising dust. "Who did this?" she asked. He didn't answer. He only said, "Someone followed me from town." Inside, she set the lamp low, the wick flickering against the growing dark. He sat on the chair by the fire and peeled his shirt back with a hiss. The gash was long, not deep, more a warning than a killing blow. But the mark had purpose. A line left by someone who wanted to be remembered. She cleaned it with hot water and lye soap. His skin twitched beneath her cloth, not from pain but memory. Something tightened in him when her hand grazed his ribs. She didn't ask, and he didn't stop her. "Tattoo on his arm," Elias said at last. "A vulture, black ink." The storm came down like judgment. Thunder cracked, shaking the beams. Rain slapped the windows and sheets. The wind cried like a child too long forgotten. That night, Cora didn't sleep well. She dreamt of her husband's boots, again blood on the solace, his back turned as he walked away into a war he never returned from. At dawn, silence came, but it wasn't peace. A horse approached just as the clouds began to lift. A lone rider in a black coat, wide hat pulled low. He dismounted with grace that didn't come from farming. His boots were polished. His belt gleamed. A silver revolver hung at his hip, its barrel long, etched with symbols worn down by time. On his left forearm, peeking through his sleeve, black ink in the shape of a vulture. "Name's Quinn," he said at the porch. Silas Quinn, heard. There was coffee up this way. Cora stood in the doorway, her braid falling over one shoulder. Elias remained behind her, rifle in hand, though low at the hip. "We don't get many travelers," she replied. "I don't linger," Silas said, "just passing through." He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that cut instead of warmed, cold as tin. Polite as poison. She poured him coffee anyway. The cup trembled faintly in her hand, he noticed. They sat outside beneath the clearing sky. The storm had left puddles in the hard earth, reflecting the morning light like broken mirrors. Silas sipped slowly, eyes flicking between her and Elias. "You got a fine place here," he said, though his tone didn't match the words. Quiet, out of the way. Sometimes a man needs that. Elias didn't respond. His fingers drummed. Once against the butt of the rifle, Cora watched them both. Two men shaped by violence, though only one carried it like a badge. The other, Elias, carried it like a scar. When Silas tipped his hat and said he'd be around another day or two, she didn't stop him. But as he walked back to his horse, his shadow stretched long and thin across the porch like something not fully human. Something that might stay even after he left. Inside, Elias sat back down, his wound redressed, his coffee cold. Man like that, he muttered, doesn't ride this far without purpose. Cora nodded once, slow. And she knew without needing to be told that something had followed them both out of their pasts. And now it was circling the cabin, waiting for the fire to die down. The first night Silas stayed, Cora told herself it was harmless. A traveler waiting out the storm, boots too clean for dust, but eyes too old for peace. By the second night, the air inside the cabin thickened like rain that never fell. He played cards with Elias after supper. No money on the table, just an old deck and too many silences between shuffles. Elias barely spoke. Silas smiled too easily. And he never lost. From her room, Cora heard their low voices' tension hiding under false civility. Then whispers turned sharper. I paid my due, Silas, Elias said. You got your blood. No, came the reply, calm and cold. Not my blood. Hers. You remember her name? The table creaked. A chair scraped. Then silence. The next morning, Toma appeared near the edge of the field, standing quiet beneath the cottonwoods. Cora met him halfway, a crust of bread in her apron. That man, Toma said without greeting. He waits for the right storm, not the weather kind. Cora crouched beside him. What kind, then? The kind that tears a house down from the inside. She didn't ask how he knew. Toma always seemed to know things boys shouldn't. That evening, Cora pulled the wedding dress from under her bed. She didn't unfold it with reverence, only resolve. She laid it across the table like a letter that no longer needed to be read. Her hands moved as they once had in girlhood, cutting, pinning, threading. Soon the dress became something else. An apron. A shawl. A cloth for wiping hands after work. The needle pierced the fabric with a steady rhythm, like a heart beating again after winter. Silas watched her from the corner. He sipped coffee and leaned against the wall, one boot crossed over the other. That was meant for someone else, he said, nodding at the pile of linen. Cora didn't look up. Wasn't meant for much, turns out. Did you ever want to be here? He asked. She paused, thread between her fingers. She didn't answer, but Elias, standing just outside the door, answered for her. His voice was low, weathered. She was promised to me, he said. But she ain't mine. The words rang like a gunshot across still air. Cora froze. Silas turned to glance out the doorway. Elias didn't flinch. That night, Silas slept in the barn by Elias's order, or his own decision. No one asked Elias. Sat on the porch in the rocking chair long after the lantern had been blown out. The rifle rested across his lap, one hand on the worn wood like a prayer half forgotten. Before bed, Cora poured coffee into the tin cup and set it gently on the stoop. She said nothing. But when she looked out from her window later, the cup was empty, steam still rising. And Elias, for the first time, was looking not at the woods or the barn or the sky. He was looking at the door. It began with smoke. Cora smelled it first, a sharp, acrid scent on the wind, slipping through the cracks in the cabin walls. Then came the glow. Orange, flickering, licking up against the barn silhouette. She flung open the door just as Elias leapt from the porch, rifle slung across his shoulder, boots pounding across the earth. The barn! He shouted, already running into the rising flame. His figure blurred by smoke and shadow. Cora turned to fetch water, but stopped. She wasn't alone. Silas stepped out from the dark, the silver revolver gleaming like a tooth in moonlight. Hissa. Voice was quiet, almost tender. Time to go, Cora. She didn't move. The firelight behind her danced against the windows, casting long shadows across the floorboards. The earth smelled of ash and pine sap. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. You were never meant to die here, Silas said. This life, this place, it'll swallow you whole. Like it did him. Still, she said nothing. I've known men like Elias. They break the world around them before they let it touch them. She reached back slowly and took Elias's rifle. From its place near the door, Silas raised an eyebrow. That thing too heavy for you? She leveled it with both hands, feet steady, the fire roaring behind her. I'm not leaving. For a moment he stared at her. Then he laughed, a bitter sound, hollow at its core. You don't even know who he was. I know who he is now. At that, Elias returned, his coat scorched, hands blistered, blood on his brow. He didn't speak, he lunged. What followed was not a duel. It was older, rougher. Two men tangled in dirt and anger, fists finding bone, memories lashing harder than any blow. The revolver fell from Silas's belt, kicked aside in the scuffle. Elias fought not like a hero, but like a man who had held too much grief for two. Long, Cora stepped between them when she could no longer bear the sound of flesh striking flesh. Enough, she said. Silas froze first, then Elias, breathing ragged, lips split. Elias stepped back. Silas wiped the blood from his mouth and spat. In the dirt, she chose the ghost, he muttered. Didn't expect that. He turned, slow and mocking, and walked back to his horse. Didn't look back. The barn smoldered behind them, roof half caved. The cabin flickered with uneasy light. Elias didn't speak for a long time. He stood with his hands hanging at his sides, knuckles torn and raw. Inside, Cora fetched a basin and cloth. She said nothing as she dabbed the blood from his brow, then rinsed his hands, red water dripping onto the floor. His jaw was tight, but he didn't pull away. Later, they sat by the fire. The night was quieter than any before. He was there, Elias said, voice low. When my brother died. He stared into the flames. They reflected in his eyes like old memories. Nokoma found us after the ambush. My brother was barely breathing. She stayed for 3 days. Tried to save him. Cora watched his hands scarred, rough, still. He didn't make it, but she gave him comfort. And me, she gave me guilt. He looked at her then, not through. Her, I hated her for what I couldn't fix. Cora didn't reply. She reached out, laid her hand gently on his shoulder, and this time Elias did not flinch. Silas rode off and didn't return. The fire by the barn burned out to blackened beams, and the smell of char hung in the wind for 2 days after. Elias said little. Cora said even less. But something had shifted between them like a creek finding. It's bed after a long drought, the morning after the ash settled. Elias hitched the wagon. You still want out, he said, not meeting her eyes. I'll take you to town. No more promises. She stood on the porch, her shawl pulled tight against the breeze. The world around them was gold and gray autumn brushing everything with quiet decay. They rode without words. The grass bowed in waves beneath the wagon wheels. Cora watched. It passed, felt the ruts in the road in her bones. Halfway there, she turned toward him. I wasn't promised to you, she said. I was promised away from myself. Elias looked over, surprised maybe. Maybe not. They didn't speak again until the town appeared, small and tired as ever. The general store windows were fogged with breath and flower dust. Cora stepped inside alone. She didn't ask for white fabric. She didn't want lace or silk or anything too clean. She chose a bolt of deep blue calico rough, honest, steady. A morning color, yes, but not a color of shame. She touched the hem and smiled. Elias traded his brother's old saddle to the smithy. Said nothing when the man raised a brow. Just set the worn leather down and turned away. Before leaving, they found Toma near the blacksmith's paddock, feeding. A skinny mule old apples. Elias crouched beside him, pulled something from his pocket, a whistle carved from antler. Worn smooth from years of use. Used to call coyotes with this, he said. Don't give it to them, but you can call him Toma. Took it with both hands, eyes wide. He nodded once, solemn. The ride home was quieter than the one there. No words, but the kind of silence that no longer hurt. Snow began to fall just after the ridge, the first of the season. It came in soft flurries, slow and soundless, catching on Cora's shawl, her lashes, her open palm. Elias glanced at her. Once, she didn't notice. Or maybe she did and chose not to say. Back at the cabin, the world felt new. Not changed, but softened. Cora unpacked the fabric and began to cut slowly, without haste. Elias took the rifle from beside his bed and hung it above the hearth, no longer at arm's reach. But not forgotten, they mended the barn roof in silence. Planted garlic before the ground froze. Come spring, Cora tucked wildflower seeds into the fence line. She didn't mark them, didn't write their names. Let them bloom or not as they chose, her braid was looser now. Some days she wore it down. Elias still rose early, still rode the pasture alone. But his returns were different, slower, like a man with something to come back to at night. They sat by the fire, not touching, not talking much, but together, and when the coyotes cried in the dark, neither of them reached for the rifle, they just listened.